Can this stylish, multi-purpose, home-use grinder produce results in the cup on par with a far more expensive, large burr commercial grinder? Hey, coffee lovers, Mark here from Whole Latte Love, excited to share Varia's VS3 grinder with you. I love the minimalist design of this multi-purpose single doser. It won the 2022 Good Design Award at SCA Japan. It has shipped tens of thousands of units since release and has been upgraded since the first version with a second generation motor and other improvements. Varia's stated mission is engineering the specialty coffee experience with approachable and intuitive to use products that help users make exceptional coffee. So, coming up in this video, I'll look at the VS3 features. What's unique? I'll show you the workflow, including usage tips. We'll do a taste test and compare flavor from the VS3 to our commercial grade reference grinder, have results of in-house testing, appraise the build, look under the hood, check out upgrades like titanium burr sets, and accessories including my new favorite value coffee scale and portafilter dosing cups that are designed to work with the grinder. And we'll see what comes in the box and more. So the basics on the VS3, first, the modern, chic, minimalistic design. Yeah, it really is an eye catcher. This one is going to be noticed on your counter. And if you've researched this grinder elsewhere, know this one features the second generation motor with a full stainless gearbox and over torque protection. Now, the VS3 is a multi-purpose single doser with a range to go from espresso through to drip and pour over and right out to cold brew. With a burr movement of 10 microns for each mark on the adjustment, it has the finesse needed for espresso. And because it's stepless, you can make finer adjustments between those marks. With a 30-gram hopper capacity, this grinder is perfect for individual hand brews like pour-overs. But it's probably not a grinder you'd use for an 8-cup pot of drip coffee. I mean, you could do that with multiple loadings and a longer duty cycle than grinders at more than double the price, but it's really oriented more to personal use for specialty brewing. The VS3 runs at 170 RPMs, powered by a DC motor. Now, something you're going to want to be aware of is the power supply. While the VS3 itself is compact, you've got to be okay dealing with the cords and this power brick that converts AC to DC power. Grinding speed is slower than the prosumer level grinders I typically use for espresso, but you know, at slower speed, it does come with some benefits. First, it means less frictional heat generation, so no cooking the flavor out of your beans. And have a listen. It's one of the quietest grinders I've tested. You won't be waking up late sleepers, and it's generally accepted that slower grinding produces less fines. The 76.5 degrees slope geometry focuses on zero retention. The VS3 is super compact, but really solid, coming in at a hefty 8 pounds. The seamless body, it's made from die-cast space-grade aluminum. You know, pick it up and it's a surprising amount of weight in a package this size. You know, I often make a distinction in my reviews between plasticky appliance-grade products and those made predominantly of metal. The VS3 definitely is a machine-grade product. Aside from the silicone bellows and finger guard, it's heavy metal all around and inside out. And you know what? I do like that heavy metal. The dosing cup is magnetic, so it snaps brilliantly into place on the base. Incidentally, that cup fits both 54 and 58 millimeter portafilters, but if you do a lot of espresso, there are magnetic-based 54 and 58 millimeter accessory dosing cups available. Now, if you get one of those, that's going to open up the included dosing cup for weighing beans and loading the grinder. Now, up top, there's a cover also with magnetic connection, and that can come in handy to prevent losing beans from popcorning, which can happen. There's also a bellows that you can choose to use or not, pump it and air puffs through the system for lower retention performance. There are just two controls. The top collar here, it turns to adjust grind size. Now on most grinders, those size adjustment markings, they don't really mean much. They're just for reference really, but those on the VS3, they do. Like 0 is 0, and there are recommended setting ranges by brew method to get you started. The other control, just a simple on-off switch on the base. The stock Supernova burrs are 420 stainless steel, hexagonal 38mm conicals with 6 cores. Now, those burrs are fine, but you can upgrade with 4 titanium treated burr sets available. They are surprisingly affordable and a consideration, especially for those regularly brewing denser specialty grade lighter roasts. Varia is fairly unique in providing laser analyzed grind particle distribution graphs for the burr sets to help you choose the best for your beans and brew method. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. Now, I've used the VS3 a lot and never had a no start due to hard beans, but that can be an occasional issue even with far more expensive commercial grinders. Now, beyond targeting different particle distributions, the titanium burrs hold a sharper edge for a longer lifespan. Like any new grinder out of the box, there's likely to be some static until the burrs are seasoned with a coating of coffee oils, and that's especially true when operating in low humidity environments. Now, after some grinding, that should, for the most part, go away, but the grinder does come with an RDT spray bottle to help control static and lessen retention in everyday use. To RDT, give the beans a couple of sprays and shake to distribute the moisture. With RDT, you can expect to average well below 0.2 grams of retention. Now, you don't have to RDT, but using it in combination with the bellows helps with the exceptionally low retention. You set your grind size by turning the adjustment collar. Here's a chart of suggested settings to get you in the ballpark. As you can see, there's range from Turkish all the way out to cold brew. Of course, grind size is critical for espresso, and as I often say, it's not set and forget. When you change your bean type, as beans age, or you change things like dose weight, your grind size will likely need some adjustment. If you're new to espresso and not familiar with how to dial in grind size, be sure and watch the video I've linked up here, or that's down there in the description, that shows you how, no matter what grinder you're using, get that grind size right, and you're gonna be making great espresso. So, weigh out your beans, spray and shake, turn on the grinder, and then load your beans. Turning the grinder on first, called hot starting, is not required, but it is advisable, especially with harder, lighter, less developed roasts. If beans are popcorning out, use that cap to cover the hopper or bellows so you don't lose any. Once the beans have ground through, if you're using the bellows, push gently on it a few times to puff some air to get any remaining grounds out for best retention performance. And you do want to do those puffs gently. Get too aggressive with that, you might end up changing your grind size. So what does a coffee taste like out of this grinder? For a read on that, I had staff members do some blind taste testing, comparing espresso ground using the VS3 to the same coffee ground on our Chiato E37S reference grinder. I kept all the variables the same, so use the same coffee, our fresh locally roasted crema wave, which we're all very familiar with. Same 18-gram dose weight. I pulled all shots on a dual boiler ECM Synchronica and dialed into the same 1-to-2 brew ratio with shot timing for each of the 36-gram extractions within a couple of seconds of each other. With both grinders dialed in, I prepped 2 preheated portafilters simultaneously out of sight of our testers, so nobody except me knew which espresso was made from which grinder. I marked the portafilters and bottom of the cups with dots. 1 dot for the Chiato E37S and 2 dots for the Varia VS3. I had 3 groups of 2 taste the espresso. I pulled the first espresso and had them start tasting that while I immediately pulled espresso from the second grinder. With each group, I discussed their flavor impressions and then had them push their favorite extraction forward. Now, of course, this is all very subjective, but my big takeaway from the tasters was really no overwhelming preference. They were all able to pick a favorite, but for the most part found the extractions very similar. A few noted things like a little more brightness, or this one is a touch more sour. After all the tasting, I emptied and flipped the cups to reveal the grinder. The VS3 cups with the 2 dots edged out the Chiato and were chosen by 4 of the 6 tasters. For filter coffee, I had my colleague John come in and prepare 2 pour-overs using our single origin Colombia Tolima, 1 ground on the VS3 and 1 the Varia Vario, a fairly standard multi-purpose grinder with a good reputation and higher price than the VS3. Now, John used the same dose weight, similar grind size, and brewing parameters. Again, grinding was done out of sight of our tasters, and they were called in once the cups were poured. Now, since we had some of the same tasters, I changed the markings to keep everyone honest. So cups with 1 dot had the Varia VS3 brew, and the 2 dot cups were from the Baratza Vario Plus. They tasted, first a group of 4 and then a group of 2. And again, I asked for their comments during the tasting, and those, some noted slightly more clarity of flavors in one cup over the other, or commented on a little more body, but those impressions were varied a bit among our tasters. In general, all said they enjoyed both cups, and nobody mentioned big over-the-top differences. I emptied and flipped the cups to reveal the markings, and in pour-over, it was a tie with 3 tasters choosing the VS3 brew and 3 picking the Vario Plus. What does all that say? Well, am I going to get rid of my Chiato for espresso? Well, heck no. I love its speed and the fluffy grind distribution, but honestly, pretty amazing to get comparable espresso from a grinder at about 1/5 the price. For our performance testing, I always dial in grinders to produce a median particle size for espresso at 250 microns, plus or minus 10%. To get there, I'm using a Lightel's CM200 particle analyzer. Now, Varia recommends a setting of between 3 and 4.5 for espresso, so I went right in the middle to 3.75, and honestly, I was amazed that on the very first try, my analysis got a median particle size of 255 microns. Usually I have to do a bunch of dialing in and retesting, and I'm rarely that close to the 250 microns. Another cool thing, Varia says each mark on the adjustment represents a 10 micron burst shift. That kind of info from manufacturers is really rare, and you know, I love it. Thank you, Varia, for that. For sound tests, I place our meter at operator ear level from the grinder and measure both average and peak dBA. I was not surprised it came in at an average of 64 and peak of 65.2. The VS3 is essentially the quietest grinder of the dozens I've tested using this method. To measure retention, I'm measuring cycle to cycle retention and also looking at stuck retention. So in a used grinder, load up 18 grams of RDT beans, grind through and operate the bellows and weigh what comes out, and I repeat that 10 times. Now, I did brush off the grinder after each grind cycle. On a dose of 18 grams, my average weight out was 17.93 grams. Here's a graph of all 10 results. Now, RDT adds a slight amount of weight, but overall, this grinder easily matches or betters other single dosers I've tested. 8 out of 10 doses were within 1/10 of a gram of 18. In my book, 2/10 of a gram is inconsequential in an 18-gram total dose, so performance here is excellent. Stuck retention is what's left behind in the nooks and crannies like screw heads. To look at that, after all my testing, I operated the bellows fairly aggressively and opened up the grinder to see what was inside. And as you can see here, not much is left behind. Just not many places for grinds to stick around. Now, with some extended use, a bit more might accumulate, but not much and easy to clean out if needed. To derive grinding speed, I used the data from the 10 retention tests, which I had been timing. Grind times for the 18 grams ranged from 37 to 40 seconds, resulting in a 0.45 grams per second average rate through the 10 tests. Very close to Varia's published rate of 0.5 grams per second for espresso. This VS3 is fairly new with less than maybe a kilo of grinding and would likely speed up a hair after more grinding. Now, I did not test at filter coffee grind size, but according to Varia, it's 0.8 grams per second. Like all good machine grade products, there's really nothing easily breakable on or in the VS3, but let's take a look inside. Now, this is the second generation of the grinder, so familiar with the original, internal components have been simplified. To get in, just turn off the grind size adjustment collar, remove this ring, pull out the upper burr, which has a ball bearing resting on top, then use a tool to loosen the nut and remove. There's a lock washer under the nut, and then you can pull the lower burr and ground spindle. There's a thin washer under the lower burr, which sits on top of the spindle. Around the edges are 4 springs, and those bring back some memories of the springs in older Mazzer grinders. And included with the grinder is a tool and spare parts package with extra springs and more. Love that. You know, I might have lost a Mazzer spring or two to a vacuum back in the day. As you can see, the internal chamber is easily accessible, nice and smooth with few areas for the coffee gunk to accumulate. You know, I like the way the ground chute starts with the angle out of the bottom of the grind chamber. In a lot of grinders, the spindles have to push grinds horizontally through a side hole, and that's going to result usually in more retention. Reassembly is easy, a real improvement from the first generation model, and when you get it all back together, guess what? 0 on the size adjustment ends up back at 0. So with that, so long as you remember where it was set, it's easy to get back to whatever grind size you had before opening things up. So a quick look at some usage tips and accessories. First, I'll just mention that although the grinder comes with the RDT sprayer here and bellows, you'll get really good performance in most cases, even if you don't use them. Plenty of people don't. It really just depends on how anal you are about pure doses and retention. One of the Gen 2 upgrades was stronger magnets on the hopper lid. And I've seen other users say you're going to need to pry it off with a fingernail or something. My tip here, just give that lid a little twist and it pulls right off. No fingernails required. If using harder, lighter roasted beans, it may help to hot start the grinder. That is, have the motor running before adding beans. And you may want to manually feed beans a little more slowly to avoid stopping the grinder. Now, Varia makes that recommendation in their documentation. Now, that said, I've used the VS3 a lot and I have yet to experience a no start or stop while grinding. For accessories, check out the 4 available titanium burr upgrades. Now, the stock Supernova stainless burrs are excellent, but if you want to make a switch, it's easy and affordable to explore how the particle distribution profiles of the different burr sets can change the flavor of your coffee. You're probably going to want to weigh your beans, and for serious brewing, a scale really is required equipment, so check out Varia's AccuScale. There's a linked video with more on that in the description, but real quick, it features IPX5 water resistance, all metal case with a build quality and feature set that's similar to the industry standard Akaya Lunar, but at half the price. Now, I do like Varia's magnetic dosing cups. They're available in 54 and 58 millimeter sizes for a sure and shakeable fit dosing your portafilter. If you have one of those, it's going to open up the included dosing cup for weighing and loading your beans. And I have to mention the Gadget Classic Evo Pro. You know, if you're looking to get into espresso above the appliance grade products, there is not a better value combo than the VS3 and the Classic to make that move. And should you decide to go for a machine upgrade down the road, know the VS3's grind quality has you covered for that. So I'm really impressed with the in-cup espresso quality of the VS3, and I'm not the only one. You know, do a search on VS3 flavor and you'll see users mentioning things like increased body and clarity with more pronounced flavor definition. Those searches are also a great place to get an idea and perspectives on which burr set upgrade might best suit your brew method and bean type. When you consider the VS3 against grinders in the same price range, you know, it's really no contest for both flavor and build quality. At this price range, you're going to see a lot of plastic from competitors. With a VS3, it's higher level grinding, much nicer build quality, and a very friendly price point. On the flip side, you've got to be okay with that power brick and cords. They could be a challenge if you like a clutter-free counter. With a 170 RPM grinding speed, some patience is required with typical double shot grind times in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 seconds. And single dose grinding is not for everyone. There's a more involved workflow than simply grinding from a hopper loaded with beans, but the quality payoff, that's what most people are probably looking for. Now, if you have questions about the VS3 or anything coffee, of course, use those comments and I'd be happy to get you a detailed answer. And if you love coffee and espresso as much as I do, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Mark, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll come back soon for more of the best on everything coffee, brought to you by Whole Latte Love.